Today's guest is Callie Felstet. She spent 5 years teaching English in primary schools abroad. The majority of her time was spent in Spain. This is one of my favorite countries that I've ever visited, so I'm super excited to hear about your experience, Callie. Thanks so much for being on the interview today. Yeah, so I would love to ask you where it all started. I know before we talked on the recording, you mentioned that you were saving up to go abroad. Where did it all start for you, the desire to go abroad?
So living in a place like Montana, where we're not super culturally diverse, we don't have a lot of other cultures available to us necessarily. I knew when I was going through university that I at least wanted to travel. And so studying to be a teacher, I was like, well, maybe there's a way I can use my teaching degree and be able to use that to travel. And I had a few friends who had done some programs like the program I did in Spain, and I traveled a little bit. And I just kind of decided, I was turning 25 that year, and I said, this kind of seems like it's either the time I'm going to get a job that I'm going to stay in, or I kind of have my moment that I can kind of fly away for a little bit, and I still have time to come back if I want to. So that was kind of my thought process there.
So let me get this straight. You didn't experience much culture in your state, and you just had that inner desire to reach out, because that's not always normal. Some people are very comfortable.
Probably not normal. And I'd had a few other traveling experiences. Like I went to Canada in high school with my band class, and I went with my mom and my sister to Mexico when my sister turned 21. And I was probably 23 at the time, and we were at a resort, and it was super touristy. And I just remember thinking, like, there has to be a better way to travel than this. And, seeing the language barrier was a big problem. I really wanted to go somewhere and learn another language. And, living somewhere to me seemed like a way that I could get a deeper experience than just like the surface area travel experience that you normally, you can get a really cool experience traveling somewhere also, but it's very different when you live there.
So you were interested after, you've been interested since college to go somewhere. Was there anything that helped you make your decision to go abroad? Anything that
I used several friends that I had talked to who kind of had told me about their experience, and were like, I met some really cool people. And then I read some travel blogs. I was reading blogs about people who were traveling, and I think I was just really jealous of this experience that people were having in another country. And I think sometimes our life in America seems really busy. Like I don't have enough minutes in the day to fit everything that I need to do in it. And I'm just running around and reading these blogs of people, which obviously, they're putting the most beautiful picture of it out there, but their lives didn't seem filled with that. And I thought I wanted to try that out and see how that worked for me.
Awesome. So I know that you first went to Thailand. That's actually where we met. And then later went to Spain. Can you kind of tell me how your experience was leading up to Thailand? And
so leading up to Thailand, I was super nervous because I hadn't really traveled much at all, and I hadn't traveled alone. And then I just decided to move across the country to Bangkok, of all places, totally alone. And, my flight didn't go as planned. I missed a flight. I missed my shuttle to the airport. And then I did a program with a mutual friend of ours, Chandler. That's how we know each other. And it was kind of nice because we all met at a hotel for this program. So I did get a little bit of an eased in version where we were all at a hotel. I had an already group of friends that were there doing. But you can attest to this. Thailand is a crazy place, and everything is loud and smelly and crazy. And it was a very fun experience. I loved how easy it was to travel. I loved how easy it was to go find new things to do. My experience in Spain felt more like a normal life, if that makes sense. Like it felt like my life, but in a European country. Thailand, I didn't know if that was somewhere that I could have lived for a long, long time. Spain, I could have lived there forever and been happy. But unfortunately, it was really far away from my family. So
eventually you had to come back because now you're in Montana, right?
Now I'm in Montana and I'm back, and it was really hard to leave. I will always miss that. I'm excited to travel, although it's hard when your heart is somewhere else, because now traveling, I'm like, I want to go back and see my friends in this place I've already been. But it's really nice to be back in Montana and, get to be a part of the people here's lives again. Because traveling and living abroad is hard. You miss a lot of things. I think people just have this like, oh, you're so lucky. I could never do that. And, I am lucky. I'm really lucky I get to do it, but it was a lot of work. And you also make a lot of sacrifices that I don't think people really realize. You're not there for birthdays or, heaven forbid somebody passes away or graduation. You miss a lot of what seems like little moments, but it's also moments you don't get to have back. So that is hard. It is a sacrifice, but not always easy.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me about the program that you took for Thailand, and was it different than the program that you took in Spain?
Yes. So in Thailand, I signed up for a program where we got our TESL certification, which is a 120-hour based program that you're doing. And we did it in person. So we had class, I think, for 2 weeks. And then the last week we had some in person, like we got to practice in a school. And through the program that I did, they provided us with a job. So they found a job for us somewhere in Thailand. We couldn't really have a choice over where that was. And then we had to stay there for 6 months to get our TESL certification. I think it was a great experience. I think it was the right choice for me to go over there with a little bit of assistance. But had I known, I probably could have made a lot more money having a teaching degree and going over there by myself. Maybe I would have tried to do it differently, but I think that also would have been really challenging for me, not knowing anything about living abroad. That being said, now knowing what I do about living abroad, I would go over there and do that by myself a lot easier. The program I did in Spain is actually like we get a student visa, so it's like an exchange, a language exchange. So I have a certain amount of hours I can work in either a primary school or a high school. And you kind of get to choose which region you would like to be in, but you also don't have a lot of choice over that as well. And the first 3 years that I was there, I could work 12 hours a week at my school. And then the last year it was 16. So I could do private classes or something on the side, but it was pretty limiting in terms of what I was able to do for work. So that was definitely a factor in why I moved back. But both programs were amazing opportunities that I wouldn't have had the experiences I did had I not been able to do that, especially Spain, because it can be hard to get a visa to live and work in another country, especially in Europe. So to have that opportunity to be able to work and be able to live there and have a life, that was really a cool experience for me.
So you mentioned that you might have been able to make more money just going abroad with your degree. Do you think that you didn't actually need the TESL or TEFL, whichever one you took?
I think that in Thailand, it helped me. And I think had I decided to get a job, like a different separate job outside of the one they provided after the 6 months, I think I would have made more money having that certification, because every little thing you have helps you out. In Spain, it wasn't necessary. I needed a college degree and it didn't really matter what it was in. So I think that was also a little bit of a hard thing for me, being overqualified for the position that I was in and not really getting any responsibility that comes with a teacher when I have a teaching degree and I have certification to teach different things. And it was pretty low on the responsibility level, which is really nice for one side of it, but it wasn't something that was sustainable for me. It wasn't what I wanted to have my whole life.
Well, I can definitely imagine, because as much as, having an easy life, it's, human nature is to want to grow. So if you're not growing, it's easy to be down, or people can get depressed if they don't feel like they're improving. Besides a lot of other factors, if you're not growing, sometimes
I definitely felt that way.
Really?
Yeah, it was a really great job. It was a nice opportunity. I wasn't super stressed, but it wasn't something I saw myself doing for the rest of my life. I didn't feel like I was getting on that next step to start my next chapter or whatever that may be.
Gotcha. So, before moving to Thailand, did you look into TEFL or TESL? Because I've looked into it a couple times, and there's like so many different ways that you can different prices. I wonder sometimes, is this a real accreditation?
So I kind of go both ways on that. There are a ton of different ways to do it. When I was doing some research, I had seen that the in-class like the in-person classes were a better route to go. Also because you just get a little bit of training yourself. And we had a really great teacher for our class, which was nice. And it was nice to get to experience in the Thai schools before I just got thrown into the Thai schools in an actual job situation. That being said, I think it would depend on what kind of work you're looking to do. Like, I probably didn't need my TESL for anything that I've done in the last 5 years, but I do feel like it's helped me having it. I don't feel like it was a negative thing to have. Doing the program that I did was quite expensive compared to what you can pay for a TEFL, just a normal 120 hours online. But like I said, the experience I made, the friends I met, and them helping me get off my feet in Thailand, I think was worth it for me, even if it was a little bit more expensive than I could have done it a different way. I've never used my accreditation there in a way that I think people care that much about it, but I think that depends on the job you're looking for.
Gotcha. So tell me about your teaching experiences, whether in Thailand or in Spain. What some funny experiences, challenging, making it worth it all?
Yeah. So in Thailand, I worked at a private school. And so I was primarily the homeroom teacher for a class of second graders. And so they would get all of their core subjects in English. And then I would do a few sides on the not as private, not paying as much to go to school class where they would get like 1 hour of English instead of all of their classes. And truthfully, I didn't love my job in Thailand. I feel like just even the culture of the way that they interact with each other is sometimes hard to get used to, like teachers slamming an eraser on the desk or a ruler to get kids' attention or just like shouting at them. And that was kind of hard for me to get used to. And the class sizes were massive. I had like 35 kids in my class. Mm-hmm. So when you have 35 kids who kind of understand what you're saying, but not really, it's definitely a challenge. And the school that I worked at, I think put more emphasis on making it look really good to the parents, like we were really teaching English. And for me as the teacher, seeing that they would prefer that kids just copied each other's books, that was frustrating because, I'm passionate about teaching. I love doing that. So that job did not necessarily spark joy for me. But I think it was a really good experience to have. And there's so much of Thai culture that is just so different than what we're used to here. Even, getting together with teachers or, big parties they would do at the school and all the kids dress up. And so I really thought it was cool to get to experience Thai culture in that way. In the Spanish schools, so I primarily worked in physical education classes. And so I would teach English with physicians and then do like the English class with our English director. And I liked that as well. I think it's difficult sometimes when you're trying to teach a language to kids who are forced to learn it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I didn't always love teaching English. I loved working with kids. I loved teaching, but I think teaching a language to kids who aren't passionate about it is sometimes very frustrating because they don't care. And it's hard to give them that care. But I loved working with my Spanish kids. And when I got to connect with them outside of, just the English class and get to connect with them a little bit more, it was so fun to share cultures with them and share things that I knew, like Spanish kids are obsessed with knowing about prom and homecoming dances and things like that because it's such an American thing. And they see it in the movies, but they don't have any idea what it's about. So it was really fun to get to share that with my kids. So yeah, I think if I had to choose which experience I liked better working in the schools, I would probably choose Spain.
And so Spain, did you agree more with their, I guess, their teaching way of
practices?
Teaching?
Yes, I think it was still different than the US, but less aggressive than Thailand. And also, I think a big part of it in Thailand was the massive class sizes. And, wow. You can't, I think it's also hard when you're not communicating with the parents at all. And, you don't have any of that communication with them. And I think that's kind of a little bit isolating as a teacher. And so that was difficult for me in Thailand being the homeroom teacher. In Spain, I didn't have that problem because I was more of an assistant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 35 kids, that seems like a lot. And I
it's a lot.
Thing that you did. I taught English in China at one point, and I only had a group of like 5 kids, but I can't imagine 35 kids not understanding me.
Yeah, it's a lot, and like you're trying to make it fun for them, but I don't know. It was definitely challenging. But so moving forward a little bit now, but I work in a Spanish immersion school in Montana now. And I work with kids who want to be at that school, and teaching another language to kids who at least care about it, their parents are motivated about it, is a huge change.
So how do you know that they want to be at that school?
Well, okay, I think there are enough other things they like about that school, and a lot of my students have been going there since preschool, so for them it's really normal to get their classes in Spanish. And I think it's just presented in a different way. Like, my kids in Spain had 2 hours of English a week, 2 hours of Castellano, Spanish, and 2 hours of Gallego, because they speak a different language where I was living. So I mean, that's 6 hours of language classes that elementary students are receiving a week, and that's a lot. I just think they kind of didn't see the use in it. And I think in certain parts of the world, while English is very useful, I think sometimes people have a little bit of a bad attitude about it just because that's the language everybody has to learn. And
Right.
I can understand that. I definitely see how fortunate I am now to be an English native, and how much easier that makes a lot of traveling and living in different parts of the world for me, in a way where it's, I have Spanish friends who were traveling in Thailand, and trying to imagine them speaking to Thai people in their second language of English that they also didn't speak very well, compared to me, where I could at least eke out some English with them. It's just, I don't take for granted anymore, I think, what being an English native speaker means going out in the world.
100% agree with you. Yeah, that's definitely something that like I always was like, oh, I wish I was born in another country. Like United States is so boring. But then at the same time, if I was born in any other country, I'm sure I would have think that country is boring.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think that happens a lot. Like, people always want to be from somewhere that they're not.
Yeah, yeah. But English is amazing, and we do have so many opportunities as far as work and being comfortable wherever we go.
Right, and being the common language anywhere that we go. And even Spanish, which is a pretty highly spoken language. I mean, there's still a lot of places in the world that people don't speak Spanish.
So, did you end up speaking or learning Spanish really well for
Yes.
your?
So I arrived to Spain, and I had done maybe 2 years of Spanish in high school, 10 years before. And I had done a summer of Duolingo, and I was like, I am ready. And I got there, and I was in a tiny little town that they mostly spoke the Gallego, the other language from the portion of Spain where I was in. And they spoke really fast, and I couldn't understand anything. And it was like a serious fish out of water situation where I'm trying to rent an apartment and go to the grocery store, and nobody understands what I'm saying, and they all speak so fast, and I can't understand their accent. A big difference also between Castellano, the Spanish they speak in Spain, and the Spanish they speak in Latin America that we normally learn here in the US. And it was very, very challenging. I think had I spent less than 2 years there, I definitely would not have come out speaking the language. I was pretty fortunate, though, because I lived in a small town. I was kind of forced to learn the language more than friends I had who lived in bigger cities who could get by with, learning just a little bit, and people spoke English. I had to. And most of my friends, almost all of my friends, were from there. So, if we're at a dinner or a barbecue, everyone is speaking in Spanish. So it was a nice incentive. But it was a long journey, and it was hard, and I'm a really social person, and I love talking to people, and I love telling jokes and being sarcastic. And to have to go through a pretty long period of time there where I'm, more of the wallflower and more of the person but you're in a circle of people having a conversation, and by the time you figure out what they're talking about and you come up with your response and then you try and say it, the conversation's already 10 miles away. It doesn't even matter anymore. So I think, learning patience and to listen was a good skill for me, but it was definitely hard. But I love being fluent in a language now. It's nice feeling comfortable in it, especially my last year that I was in Spain, not having to feel nervous if I needed to go to the doctor or go to the store or go, change something with my bank account. because it is kind of interesting when everything that you have to go do is hard. Like something as simple as ordering a pizza on the phone. I didn't do that until my third year there. And we take that so much for granted because you're like, oh, I just want a pepperoni pizza. But it's like in another language, you call, maybe they ask you a question you're not prepared for, you don't know, you can't hear them very well, they don't understand you. It's just this whole thing. So many things that you take for granted that I can do with my eyes closed here in English just became difficult. And everything was, okay, I've got to prepare my list of, I'm going to the doctor and I'm going to write him a note that I've Google translated just in case he doesn't understand me. So that was, I wasn't expecting that challenge, but I think it was a really good challenge to have.
That's too funny. Yeah, you definitely experience life in a different way.
Yeah.
So you learned Spanish. Would you, what were the means that you learned Spanish, and would you recommend learning in a certain type of way?
So I learned by trying to do what I could on like Duolingo. I think apps like Duolingo are excellent for beginners and getting like a baseline of vocabulary. I tried to do some studying by myself, but honestly, just talking to people and, trying to learn from people like expressions and ways that they said things there. I truly think the best way to learn somewhere where they speak it, though. I can't imagine having tried to learn this language out of a book. That being said, I do struggle with grammar and writing sometimes because I learned it conversationally. I learned it by speaking. I learned it by expressions. And so, sometimes it's hard if I have to write something out. I don't know where all the accents are. And, there's specific parts of the grammar that I still struggle with that give me away for not being a native speaker because I use them wrong. But I would definitely recommend either living or traveling somewhere where they speak it, or finding somebody that you can have like a real conversation with. And that was something interesting in Spain is I gave so many private classes to people wanting to learn English. And a lot of them were just like people who wanted to meet and have coffee and talk and do something like that. And imagining people here feeling that way about a language was really funny for me because, I can't imagine people wanting to pay, $10 to go sit down and have coffee with somebody just to learn Spanish, So I think we do not value languages in the same way that other countries do, even because we're not exposed to them as much. In Spain, because they have so many countries so close that all speak different languages, they're even just exposed to it more. And here, I don't think we have that exposure.
Yeah, I know. I feel like most people, it's like normal for them to learn, like in Europe, to learn like 3 or 4 languages, and they're like, yeah, it's nothing.
Well, and even if they, like a lot of my students in Spain probably will go through 12 years of English and probably come out with very basic knowledge of conversational English. But that being said, they're still exposed to it. They still watch movies that are, in English with subtitles. They listen to a lot of English music. So I do definitely think that exposure helps. And, working at my Spanish immersion school, there are a lot of studies about how learning another language does make you look at learning other things in a different way. I think, like, for example, my friend and I in Spain were talking about how it's so interesting with languages that I can express myself differently now in Spanish in ways that I can't in English. And I could express myself sometimes there in English in ways that they're just, that verb or that way to say something doesn't exist. And it really changes the way you're able to get across what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love when I'm translating something too, and it doesn't, you have to like, you definitely have to like walk around it, right? Like,
yeah, you can't just translate it word for word. You have to say, okay, in general, this is what you're talking about. What language do you speak?
Oh, I speak Spanish and Portuguese.
Oh, okay. So Galician, the language where I was living, is like a mix of Spanish and Portuguese. So it would probably sound very similar to Portuguese to you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious. I'm gonna look it up later and see if I can.
Especially written.
So tell me about you said the place where you stayed was Galicia?
Yes. So Spain has, I think, 12 autocomunidades, which are like, they would be like states for us. And so Galicia is in the northwest portion of Spain above Portugal. And they are just like the whole coast up there on the side. And they had amazing seafood and amazing wine. And they have a different language. And so I think that language makes their culture that they have there so much more profound than something that I can say from where I'm from. You know, people would ask all the time, oh, what's something that's super Montana, or like Montana song or Montana food? And I think no matter where you're from in the United States, except for a few places like maybe the South where there's some specific food from there, it's really hard because we don't have that identity from where we are. Obviously, I'm from Montana. I love Montana, but I don't have that many things that I can show you that make me from that place. And I think having the food and the songs and the history and the culture and the clothing, all these things that just like my friends there were so proud to be Galician. And that was such a profound part of who they were. And, you know, I would get jealous sometimes because I don't think that we have that in the same way. Proud to be from the United States or from their state, but it's a very different thing, I think. And I really loved getting to be a part of that and having so many close friends from there. I got to have a lot of experiences that you couldn't have if you didn't know somebody that was from there, or someone didn't bring you to this tiny little part that barely exists on the map, that people only go there for these fiestas, you know what I mean? So that was a really cool part of the experience for me.
So what else is Galicia like? Like, would you say that there's a lot of nature? Is there more city life?
So Galicia is a lot more nature. They have the Camino de Santiago. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you. It's like a trek, kind of a religious trek, I think is what it started as. You can do the Portuguese version. You can start in France. It goes along the north of Spain. In Santiago de Compostela. And so they have like the big Cathedral of Santiago there. And that's where it technically ends. And then you can do the end of it that goes to Finisterre, which is end of the earth. And it's this lighthouse that's at the very most western point of Galicia. And so we have a lot of their history goes around that Camino because that's been being used for years. Nature, I think, is what they're most known for. I mean, they have mountains, they have coast. The coast there is the most beautiful, with beaches everywhere, and it's an incredible place to be if you like nature. You have access to so many different things. So a girl from Montana, I really liked being in Galicia. I chose Galicia for that reason. And you know, they have 3.5 million people, I think, in the whole comunidad. So the biggest city, I think, is like less than 1 million. So I liked that because I like big cities, but I like to visit them. Living in Bangkok was super fun, but I wouldn't ever want to like create my life there. It's not what I would want. Yeah, and I like walking across town and you see people that you know. And so, you know, I lived in a tiny town of like 15,000 people and I loved that. But I could go to the bigger towns and, you know, you have so much access to stuff and it's so much closer to travel. I mean, traveling 3 hours there is as far as they would go to the other side of things. I'm like, I can barely go, you know, to the next town in Montana in 3 hours. So I really like that. But they're definitely known for their seafood and their nature. A lot of people in other parts of Spain have like summer homes on the coast there, so they come there in the summer to just get a break from the city life. It's definitely a little paradise.
Were there things that I mean, I know you mentioned one was, you know, the language barrier and how difficult it was to do simple tasks, but any other things that surprised you or you weren't expecting?
Let's see. I wasn't expecting. So it rains a lot there, which is not that big of a thing, but I haven't seen like a good winter in a long time. I mean, from Montana, like we're known for our winters. So I haven't seen a winter in 5 years. So I'm excited to see that this year. I'm trying to think of other things that I didn't expect. I probably didn't expect people to be as friendly as they were. There is kind of a thing in Spain where people from the south are friendly and people from the north are cold. But I think also behind that, maybe people from the south, is a very big generalized statement, but are more of like your friend for the day. Like, I meet you, we're best friends. Oh my gosh. And people in the north of Spain are maybe a little bit harder to get to know. But once you kind of break that little shell or that barrier, they are profound friends for, they're deep friends for you. And I didn't expect to find a family there. I didn't expect to find a group of friends that were going to be so hard to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a beautiful thing to find, but also something I wasn't expecting. I didn't expect it to be that hard. I left Thailand and I left some friends there, but I didn't feel that sadness to be leaving that place. And I really left a piece of my heart in Galicia. So I didn't expect that, I don't think.
I know, right? Now, you were missing birthdays and events in the United States, but now you'll have it in Spain as well.
Exactly. So having to, be on the other end of that where I'm trying to FaceTime in and, also I think having traveled and knowing how hard it is to keep in touch with people, that is hard because I know that, when I was leaving, my friends and I were talking and we're like, we have to have a FaceTime every week, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I would love to do that, but I also know that's not going to happen. Maybe for a couple weeks, but it just is not sustainable. And so I think that's hard knowing that you obviously lose contact with people. That doesn't mean that you lose, the bond that you have with them, but your everyday, day-to-day life, you lose that with people and it's hard to feel left out of that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So to people who are interested in living abroad and working abroad, maybe in Spain or just in general, do you have any advice?
Do it. You can always come back home to wherever you're from. And that's been my thing the whole time. If I don't like it, it's a few months of my life. And if I love it, then I have had a life-changing experience. I would say do it. I think sometimes a lot of people get overwhelmed with, oh, I have to save to travel and then I have to figure all this out and I have to get a visa. And it is overwhelming. It's a lot to plan. But at the same time, you are going to have this opportunity to have these experiences. And I don't mean age-wise. I mean, you can do this at any point in time, but I would recommend doing it. I think getting out of your own country and your own comfort zone, your comfort zone especially, is such a worthwhile experience and just changes the way you look at life. And it doesn't have to be this profound thing all the time, but I think everybody could benefit from having a little bit of an adventure and feeling like they got to go see some other part of the world. And it's sad for me when people talk about traveling and say, oh, I really want to travel someday, I can't do it. And it's like, it is hard. And I'm not saying that I understand there's privilege that goes along with being able to travel and do this. I understand that. But I also think a lot of people can't get past that. Well, I just have to do it. Sometimes you just have to jump. And I think a lot of people get hung up on that. So my recommendation would be to do it. You can always come back, even if it's just the trip. I think everybody should experience other parts of the world.
Was there anything that you did to prepare yourself? And was there anything that you felt you did in vain or that wasn't necessarily necessary?
Let's see. I think that I could have prepared myself more with the language. I think I did a lot of worrying in vain, especially leading up to Thailand, but I think that's pretty normal. I would say thinking that you're going to need things from home that, I mean, like clothing and stuff like that. I think if I had known how easy it would be to replace most of that over there, I probably wouldn't have stressed myself out with trying to pack everything to go over there the first time, because then coming back, fitting 4 years of my life in 2 suitcases and a backpack was much more challenging because I had brought stuff from home too. Things I did in vain, trying to plan out every single part of my trip, maybe trying to, it's great to have an outline or an idea of what you're doing, but I think maybe even more in some of my travels I did rather than the living that I did. When I tried to have everything like, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. Well, normally every single thing that you have on that list is going to take you either half as much time or twice as much time as you thought it would. So I think the planning sometimes goes in vain, but I think it's a good idea to have an outline, an idea of what you want to do.
Yeah, so you got to do some traveling. You mentioned that you visited 10 countries?
I think 10 or 12. I think I said, because I had to count. I didn't think it had been 12. Yeah.
I thought it was 10 or 12 as well.
Yeah, so I had to count because I thought it was at 10 and I was like counting. I was like, oh, it is 12. So I got to do a lot of traveling in Thailand, which was really fun. I loved the easy, well, and in Spain, I loved how easy it was to travel compared to the US. In the US, it's hard. Everything's far away and it's expensive. In Thailand, when I was there, I got to travel to Cambodia. I got to travel to Vietnam, to Indonesia. When I was flying home from Thailand, I had an 11-hour layover and I signed up to do this little excursion to the Great Wall of China. So I went to the Great Wall of China and then came back to the airport during my layover. During my time in Spain, I went to Italy with my mom and my sister. I went to Morocco. I spent quite a bit of time in Portugal. I really love Portugal. I spent some Christmases in England. And then I've been to Mexico and Canada, but very briefly on both of those, and I would like to revisit.
So can you talk about the cost of living in Spain, or what it basically, the cost of living in Spain?
So the cost of living is quite a bit cheaper than here. Everything in America is expensive. With a grain of salt that I did live in a tinier town. I think in bigger cities like Madrid and Barcelona and Bilbao, I think it is quite a bit more expensive and more similar to what we pay in the States. But where I lived, I mean, I shared an apartment with a roommate and I paid 150 euros a month for rent. Like, it was amazing. So here paying $600 for a room in a tiny apartment is terrible, things like that. Food, where I lived anyways, was much cheaper and fresher. I felt like I was getting a lot better quality for a lot less of a cost. And, you also cook a lot more from scratch. So I think that, the cost of that also weighs out. So you can't buy as much pre-made stuff, which, my diet changed a lot and I learned how to cook a lot of that. I already love to cook, but I think learning to cook saved me a lot of money in the long run too. And I didn't have access to fast food and stuff like that where I lived. I think even just for the money that they make, if not for their way of life, I think people, at least in Spain, work to live, not live to work. And I really like that pace of life. And even with the cost of living, I think you could do things for a much more reasonable price. We would go to a festival for the weekend and it would be 18 euros for the whole weekend with camping. And you just can't, I don't think you can have as many experiences here as I could there for the same type of cost. You are still able to have them for sure, but I think the price is quite different.
Can you explain that a little bit more, what you mean by they work to live versus?
I just think their whole mindset is, when I clock out of work, I'm done. I feel like so many people take their job home with them here. And that depends a lot on your job, but, most people work 40 hours a week. And having a lot of things closely accessible, I think, changes that too. Like where I lived, people normally work from like 9 to 2:30 or 3, and then they have time off for lunch because they have a big lunch in the middle of the day. So they make more time for family. And then they go to the beach for a couple hours in the afternoon because the beach is right there. So a lot of this depends on geography. Like maybe people who live closer to the coast can do this as well. But I just felt like people made more time to get together. Like, we would have a barbecue with friends and everybody would make time to come on a Saturday. And I feel like trying to get a group of people to come together here is so hard sometimes. It's like, well, I have to work and I have to do this. And, I have something going on. And it just didn't feel as fast, as busy. It's a really hard thing to explain, but I just feel like they appreciated, going out and getting, even like the typicalness of going out and getting a coffee. It's not like you go and you get some giant big coffee and it's like $6. We go to the cafe and we meet up and we just both get a little coffee, and I can pay for both of our coffees for less than I would pay for one of my own here. Or the same with going and getting beers with friends. It's like I can go out and get a beer with 5 friends and I can pay for the whole table of beers and I'm paying less than I would pay for, well, or at least like the same price of what I would pay here. So I think, that kind of feeds into a generosity that we're not able to have here. Also here, it's like, okay, well, you Venmo me for that beer, or because it is more expensive. Everything costs more. And I don't mean that in a way where we're not generous. I think it's harder to be generous. And so I kind of lost track of where we were going with this question, I think. But I I think there are a lot of things that make their lives just not as work oriented as ours is. I don't know.
No, I can appreciate that. And I think I forget that they do take so long for their lunches. Don't they do like an hour for 2 hours or something crazy?
Yeah, so most people have like 2 hours off. They're not, and I think people think that Spanish people are just like eating and then having a nap. And that's not necessarily what's happening, but you know, they do their activities during the afternoon when we would normally be eating dinner, and then they come back and they have a small dinner, but the big meal is lunch. And a lot of families get together on Sunday. You know, the amount of friends I had in Spain that would go have lunch with their whole family on Sundays, I can't imagine most of my friends doing that here. But we also live further away from our families a lot of times. And there's just so many little factors that are just so different, but add such a different little flavor of life, I think, for them over there.
So about your time living abroad, are there any things that you regret not doing or doing while you're abroad?
I would say something that I regret, which is kind of a double-sided thing, is because I loved where I lived in Spain, I didn't travel as much because I had friends there. They were from there. They weren't interested in seeing some of these places, and I made plans with them. And so I kind of regret not taking more advantage of being closer to places in Europe. That being said, I don't know if I would go and change that and do it differently, but I do wish that I had maybe gotten to see some other places in Spain and, you know, different places in Europe. But it's hard to know all of that when you're in the moment and trying to live in the moment for that. And I do feel like I took advantage of that in Thailand. So, you know, I think I did a good job in Thailand. I saw a lot of places, and, you know, I would take advantage of even a weekend off. We went to Cambodia on a long weekend, a friend of mine and I, like 3 days, and then we came back. And you are able to do that a little bit differently. I do think one of the benefits of the way I was living my life when I was abroad is that you do have this sense of, I have to take advantage of this now because I don't know how long I'm going to have the opportunity to do this. So even like going to something, you know, a little small weekend trip or something, I said yes so much more than I probably would have in my life back here, just because I wanted to get as much out of it as I could and take advantage of that. So while I maybe didn't see as many places outside of Spain, I got so many experiences in Galicia where I was living just because I tried to say yes as much as I could. And, you know, my friends invited me to do lots of stuff because they knew that I normally would be down to go. So I think that was some pros and some cons.
Yeah, I like that. So do you think you'll ever go back now that you're back in Montana? Was this kind of something, a stepping stone, or would you do it again?
I don't know if I would live abroad again, but I would definitely travel. And I think now the hard thing is wanting to see new places and also wanting to visit my friends and, you know, see the same place that I've already seen a bunch of times. But I don't know. Who knows? My life is, it's really nice to be back, and I have a job that I'm really happy with here. So it's hard to imagine uprooting all of that again and moving to another place. But I don't know. I'm always open for it.
Yeah, so you said you probably wouldn't live abroad again. Is it just because job satisfaction, or are there other factors that would make you not want?
Living far away from my family. And I think it's very challenging getting dropped somewhere where you don't know anybody. And at least for the time being, I don't want to be in that situation again. I like having friends and having people that I know I can go hang out with and stuff like that. So, you know, I definitely think I want to spend at least a few years here. It's not out of the question, though. You know, I've always wanted to go to Australia and New Zealand. I'm a little bit older now than I can use the holiday work visa. But, you know, doing some long-term traveling, I definitely am interested in some long-term traveling.
Did you already have plans to come back to Montana, or was the pandemic a decision making?
So I decided to come back in January after I was home at Christmas because I hadn't been home in 17 months at Christmas, and that just felt like too long. because you're saving up all year for a pretty big plane ticket. And, I was like, okay, I think I'm going to move back at the end of the summer, but I have spring and summer and all of our festivals and fun things we have planned. And then a month later, the pandemic hit. And so that kind of steered my plans in a different direction. It was definitely a crazy time to move back. It was not what I was expecting, just for the pandemic, for jobs, for what I was going to do with my life. So that was definitely a challenge I was not expecting, but it was hard to be away from my family in the pandemic, and kind of be in a situation where if something happened, I couldn't come back. So I am glad to be a little bit closer in these times, although America is not a desirable place to be at the moment.
Neither is Spain, though, right?
No, neither is Spain. So yeah, both places are not ideal.
That's okay. We're all going through a similar thing, I guess. Is there anything else that you feel like you can share for people who are interested in living and working abroad?
Let's see. I think that if someone is thinking about moving abroad and is feeling very nervous about it, I think you should have more confidence that you're going to figure it out. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with the details and, trying to figure out how to send in your visa and everything else. And I think, some of that stuff just happens. It works out when you get the ball rolling. And I think you just sometimes need to get the ball rolling. Don't wait forever to make that step and make that your priority. I think you always have time to, be responsible, but I think you always have time to save more money later. And I think, taking advantage of, I'm glad I did some of the traveling when I did, some of the ways I traveled when I was 25 in Thailand. Maybe I won't want to travel that way when I'm 35, but I really don't regret having any of those experiences, but I maybe wouldn't have, it would be different if I'd done it a little bit later in life. So I would just say, trust that you can do it, have some confidence, and, don't wait forever. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I love that. And if there is a will, there's a way, even if
Exactly.
It's hitchhiking or eating off of other people's plates.
Or staying in the worst creepy hostel with cockroaches and 17 people in one room. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Is that talking from experience?
Maybe not the cockroaches and 17 people in the same thing, but I've definitely, especially in Thailand, stayed in some very budget hostels that were, maybe now looking back on it, if I was doing this all over again, I would pay, $2 more to stay in a little bit different place, but I ended up okay. It's an adventure, and, it makes for good stories later.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to ask you so many questions. I really appreciate your point of view.
Thanks for talking with me, Natasha. This was really fun.
Yay! Well, I hope you listeners got something out of it today. Callie went to Spain. Well, she went to Thailand as well, and she was an English teacher. So there's some great experience that she's given today. So hopefully everybody enjoyed, and goodbye for now.
Bye. Thank you.